Hi there, that's right, great and glorious, soon to be famous one day. Nick Dutch back on the camera again one more time. What I'm going to do today is just go a little deeper into that quote by that guy called Wizeman that is present there on the Wikipedia page on remote viewing. And I just want to try and break that down just a little further and see whether we can try and find out more about where he's coming from, shall we say, and possibly even make a few extrapolations about the phenomena of remote viewing itself. Just bear with me a second, please. Okay, so here we are, we're back on the Wikipedia page for remote viewing, and here's the quote here. It says here, I agree that by the standards of any other science that remote viewing is proven. But, begs the question, do we need higher standards of evidence when we study the paranormal? I think we do, which is just written right there. And now he goes on to explain why he thinks he does. If I say that a UFO has just landed, you probably want a lot more evidence, okay? Because remote viewing is such an outlandish claim that will revolutionize the world, we need overwhelming evidence before we draw any conclusions. Right now we don't have that evidence. And that's Richard Wizeman from the Daily Mail, January the 28th, 2008, pages 28 and 29. What can we actually tell? I mean, he's jumping to a massive conclusion. Firstly, that remote viewing would actually change the world. And what if it doesn't? What if, just hypothetically, okay, what if remote viewing is something which can happen, okay? It's a phenomenon which occurs in the world, but it won't stop like the economy, or it won't change medical science. It's just something which just can happen. Okay, it's not accurate enough, it's not reliable enough for us to be able to go and spy on the enemy, or to work out precisely what it was that your boyfriend ate for dinner last night. What if it does happen? It's not totally controllable, but it's just a phenomenon in the universe. Then essentially a lot of his claim gets eroded. And he also says we need overwhelming evidence. Now obviously that's just a quotation there. I don't actually have the full article in front of me. But what would qualify as overwhelming evidence? For remote viewing to be proven by the standards of any other science, that means it's proven, as far as I can tell. What we don't have is enough information as to the limitations, precisely what it's good for, how it can be used, what it's better for, what it's not quite as good for, what confounding variables affects this particular phenomenon. Because for someone to say that this phenomenon has been proven by the standards of science is actually a very, very big thing to say. But to get that overwhelming evidence, you would first need to understand the phenomenon. This is like saying that in one particular scientific experiment, I discovered a new element, but that element only existed for a few seconds and then vanished. I've got some records which showed that that element was present, but it was a new element. You would therefore presumably want to repeat the experiment. You would therefore presumably want to try and test the limitations of your experimental design, the temperature that this thing seemed to be created, the various other natural forces that were impacting upon it, the way in which this particular new element, once it has been created, can actually function, what its uses are, what its physical properties are. That's what you'd have to do. I mean, this idea of remote viewing being proven by the standards of science is like saying, yeah, we discovered something, it existed for a few seconds, and then it kind of like drifted away, and we don't really know that much more about it. That's what I feel this is actually saying. This phenomena has occurred. It is essentially real, but we don't understand it. Because we don't understand it, it therefore seems like a very outlandish claim. Now he uses this example of a UFO. He says, well, you know, if someone had said to you that a UFO had just landed, you would want more evidence. Well, I would want some evidence, and I would want to make sure that that evidence was provable, by current standards, and once we've got that piece of evidence, we can use that as a foundation, okay, a building block for the next level of information, such as to say, are there actually aliens out there? Was this something which has crashed? Stuff like that. Now, as far as the higher standards of evidence with the subject of the paranormal is concerned, do we really need higher standards of evidence? If a phenomenon has occurred and it has been demonstrated scientifically to be a phenomenon which has occurred, that's a step in the right direction. It's not the be-all and end-all of the whole thing. It suggests, yes, there is a phenomenon, it has occurred, we have measured it, we know that there is this phenomenon here, but we don't know how it works. Why don't we just, stop there? There's this phenomenon, it's occurred, and that's more or less all we can say about it at this present point in time. And then, once you've got that building block, you then got to investigate it more and more and more. Does it work under circumstances X? Does it work under circumstances Y? Precisely under what circumstances does this actually have the greatest likelihood of actually occurring? And here's a bit of pussy for you today. There would have to be more studies done upon the bodies and the minds of the individuals who would experience this phenomenon. There would have to be more work done upon the chemical compositions of their bodies, whether they were taking any medication, what their diet was like, whether they suffered from any allergies, what their brainwave activity was like, which parts of the brain were slightly larger or slightly smaller than the other. I saw a program about brain training recently, which showed that the part of the brain which deals with visuospatial awareness is like 5% larger in taxi drivers in London, because they have to learn visuospatial awareness. So we've got to think about what factors in an individual's life may have caused that tiny part of the brain to actually get bigger and stronger and have more interconnection so it can process more information, as opposed to somebody else who has not experienced this phenomenon. Okay, we've got to think more about this in terms of, is it a sensory thing, or is it something that the individual can actually create, and also to measure metabolic activity during the actual experience itself. Then work out how this could be synthesized and how this could be created and how this could be built up, so that more and more people understand how to have the experience. I guess we're quite lucky that Wizeman's left this rather open and just said at the end of that quotation, right now we don't have the evidence. It's not saying this phenomenon does not exist, although a lot of his discussion there is very geared against the phenomenon, just to suggest that no, people who think this is real are in fact pulling their own leg, basically speaking. But there is that little bit at the end to suggest, well, maybe we could eventually get the evidence. But, where is the research being done? The phenomenon can be created, okay, so it can be created, but where are we going to take the research into this phenomenon with the passage of time? So basically we're just left with a phenomenon, a rather curious phenomenon which appears to exist, although there are some people who rather poo-poo it, as I'm sure there are some people who poo-poo the idea that planet Earth is round, or that evolution exists, and all the rest of that. But it's just a peculiar phenomenon. It's there, it exists, or at least it seems to. There appear to be instructions as to how you can train yourself to have the experience. And the scientific community is rather divided on the subject. So basically, who actually has the responsibility to look into these phenomena, to see basically what we can actually achieve with this? Well, it's you and me. Unfortunately, it's just down to the ordinary people. I know, was it Tom Lehrer who once said the worst thing about folk music is it was written by the people? Well, unfortunately, that's the case. People have to do some experimenting and investigating, and we've got to try and find ways of turning our experimentation into something which is just a little more scientific. But as so much of it is based upon introspection, and so much of it is based upon personal experiences and the direct manipulation of your own emotions and seats of perception, trying to get that totally scientific would in fact be very, very difficult indeed. But the bottom line is, can we actually do this? Can we actually try and turn our personal experiences, our own bodies and our own brains into a living laboratory for investigation into allegedly paranormal phenomena? I would say yes. I would even go so far as to say it's our duty to a certain degree. Obviously don't let it get in the way of your day-to-day life of earning a living, looking after your family and all the rest of that. It appears to be a responsibility that we have so that we can try and get some real results that might expand, eventually, human knowledge somehow. And I suppose we've also got to think about what is the usefulness of this phenomenon and others, if they're rather weird and woolly, if we can't necessarily have total control over them. Well, if you need to have total control over all the things you experience, then I guess it wouldn't be fun. But on the other hand, instead of trying to see it as if it was like a spanner you might use to fix your car, why don't you just see it as something you can experience, just like a bright sunny day or a beautiful dream you had one night. If we can't properly apply positivistic scientific methodology to the things that we experience, then at least we can apply something of a more introspective nature. And we can just experiment and just try and find out. From my personal experience, the phenomenon appears to occur. As far as controllability is concerned, that's another issue entirely. But when it happens, bloody hell, it's amazing.